What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a final look at the spring 2024 United Football League season with the championship game showdown between the Birmingham Stallions, winners of the USFL Conference, and the San Antonio Brahmas, winners of the XFL Conference here in the 2024 season. Bottom line, I'm going to go over some of the top plays that you're going to want to include in your showdown lineups here on DraftKings this Sunday for the championship game at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm actually really excited to dive into some showdown game theory here with you all on this slate. We have a really awesome contest. As you can see at the top of the screen here, the Showdown Championship Special has $10,000 up for grabs to first place. Started off the show with a wide receiver on the screen as my favorite play. And I'd like to begin this show a little differently than the weekly UFL show because we have about 10 to 15 minutes to focus on one game, which means I have about 3 to 4 minutes to go over some showdown game theory with you all, especially if you're a little unfamiliar with it from the NFL side of things here. NFL Showdown on DraftKings in its current format, which UFL uses, has been around since 2018. I've tracked 399 large field contests across those seasons, 2018 through 2023. And there are some macro level trends that we have identified that we can leverage here in the UFL Championship game. So going into my database here of results, here's your distribution of the position that the winning captain player plays in virtually 400 contests over the last 6 years of showdown contests here on DraftKings, overwhelmingly in favor of pass catchers. And I think this makes sense. Wide receivers have far higher ceilings on far fewer touches of the football than the quarterbacks and the running backs. The thing that we have seen take place in NFL showdown contests over the last couple of years is overall ownership has caught up to this because this is a very easy research study for everybody to do and see what is winning week in and week out, night in and night out in NFL showdown. But the raw numbers on this, you have roughly 38% of the time wide receiver captains are optimal in large field contests on DraftKings. 28% of the time a running back captain is optimal on DraftKings. And about 20% of the time a quarterback captain is optimal on DraftKings. If we lump the wide receivers and the tight ends together, you're getting a pass catcher at captain almost 50% of the time in a showdown contest. And I think here in the UFL, we have at least one elite tight end here that would definitely qualify as a potential captain option on this slate. Couple of other data points to hit on quickly. You see largely 4-2, so 4 teammates from the favorite, 2 teammates from the underdog on about a third of winning rosters, and then even splits for like the other major third of winning rosters. So a lot of 4-2 and 3-3 builds in showdown. About 57% of the time in major showdown contests, games go under the total. So we have a 42-point total between the Stallions and the Brahmas here in this game. Birmingham favored by 3.5 points at this point on Thursday afternoon when I'm recording this video. A really good opportunity, I think, to forecast a game that goes under that total here and build accordingly. And then for those of you that are super in the weeds, about 10% of the time winning lineups in NFL Showdown in large field contests have no quarterbacks. And about 20% of the time you have a solo winner of that top prize. When you have a solo winner of that top prize, about 2/3 of the time that winner is in a game that goes under the total. So that's another interesting thing to be aware of. Here we have the distribution of salaries that we see in the different outcomes. Bottom line is that in general, you do want to leave at least a few dollars over in your lineups. The average median salary usage is $49,100 in winning lineups, and obviously far lower if you're going to take down the contest by yourself without splitting that nice $10,000 prize with anybody else. About $2,200 left over on average for solo winners in football showdown contests here on DraftKings. So putting all of that together, that means I'm looking, if I have like 1 or 2 tickets to this contest, to actually prioritize a pass catcher captain. And looking at my projections for this game, Jontre Kirkland is my highest projected pass catcher on the board for the San Antonio Brahmas. Do think he will be very popular as he has the highest weighted opportunity out of any pass catcher that is going to be playing in this game over the first 11 weeks of the season. Including last week's XFL Championship game, Kirkland had 92 targets this year, good for just shy of a 28% share of team targets from both Quinton Dormady and Chase Garbers in this Brahmas offense. Over 900 air yards, good for a 35% share of team air yards in the Brahmas offense. So like the clear wide receiver one of the slate, Jontre Kirkland. But there's value, I think, with some of the other Brahma pass catchers. Marquez Stevenson is going to operate largely out of the slot, significantly cheaper cost than Jontre Kirkland. We saw him have 5 targets to score a touchdown in last week's XFL Championship. And then even further down the salary table, we have Justin Smith, who is going to be the other primary outside wide receiver for the Brahmas here. He had 6 targets and a touchdown last week. We can play either of these pass catchers at captain on the San Antonio side and still feel pretty good about their upside given the volume that they command in this offense, and actually allow ourselves to do a lot more at the flex positions if we go with one of these cheaper guys at the captain position. On the Birmingham side, Deon Cain is the only underperforming wide receiver on this slate. We see 6+ targets in 4 of the last 5 games for Cain. He has gone under 30 receiving yards in each of those games. Cain could not be more underperforming at his opportunity than really any other wide receiver that sees this volume in football. Under 5 DraftKings fantasy points in 3 consecutive weeks. And in that same sample, Cain has seen 16 targets, 29% of Birmingham's air yards. There's some debate on whether or not these are like quote unquote prayer yards, just uncatchable balls from each of Adrian Martinez and Matt Corral that I'm definitely open to considering. But the bottom line is you have a wide receiver that is going to be running a high A-dot route tree outside the numbers that is going to see downfield targets, and he's only going to need to haul in 1 or 2 of those to break this slate. So Deon Cain, one of my favorite captain options at pass catcher on the Birmingham side. The other Birmingham pass catcher is going to be the primary tight end who led Birmingham in receiving yardage and touchdowns during the regular season. Jay Sternberger had just 2 targets in last week's game against the Michigan Panthers in the USFL Championship, but he is still that guy that is targeted by Birmingham's quarterbacks when they need to make a play. He actually ran more routes than anybody else on the Stallions last week, largely out of slot positions, going to be having a team-friendly role over the middle of the field for some easy completions for Corral and Adrian Martinez here on the championship. We get a trailing game script for Birmingham potentially that most people won't be building for given the way that the spread and the total is. Sternberger actually could have a much better day in a trailing game script here for the Birmingham Stallions. That's why I'm primarily interested in him as my second favorite pass catcher for Birmingham. Behind Sternberger, here's where the usage and the opportunity for the Stallions pass catchers gets a little murky. They've kind of rotated options behind these 2 guys all season long. There's a lot of guys that are in play, guys that won't really get a ton of volume, but in a showdown format are all very, very viable in tournaments that we need to talk about. And the first one that I want to talk about is not going to be the first one that you're going to see in your box scores. Last week, didn't have a target, did not have a reception. We're talking, of course, about Kevin Austin Jr. He actually played the most snaps at wide receiver for the Birmingham Stallions in last week's game against the Michigan Panthers. You don't even see a Week 11 line here in his DraftKings box score because he wasn't targeted at all. Also under 5 fantasy points in each of the last 4 games for the Birmingham Stallions. Probably not going to see a ton of ownership, priced at just $4,800 here for a flex play. Not sure Austin is a player that I'm going to consider at captain just because of the low volume, but absolutely going to be on the field enough where 1 or 2 plays that he hauls in, if he potentially scores a touchdown like he did in back-to-back weeks in week 6 and week 7, he's going to be the differentiator that you're going to want to use in your tournament lineups this week. Where the field, I think, is going to go for cheap Stallions pass catchers, other than Kevin Austin, is going to be Amari Rodgers. Amari Rodgers largely playing out of the slot last week. About 81% of his routes were out of slot positions for Birmingham. Had 10 points thanks to his receiving touchdown in last week's game. Rodgers is going to be on the field for roughly 45% of this team's passing plays and routes. And obviously in Showdown, that's enough for us to be considering him here. Marlon Williams is going to be on the field even more than Amari Rodgers. He's a little bit more expensive than Amari Rodgers, so that's why I think I'm slightly more interested in him here. But Marlon Williams ran a route on about 55% of team dropbacks over the last 3 weeks of play. So he actually has the 4th most snaps and routes at receiver on this offense behind all the other guys that I've mentioned. The other cheap Stallions to look at here, Gary Jennings flashed a little bit in the UFL Championship last week, his biggest workload in about 4 weeks. 2 receptions for 59 yards on just 3 targets. Jennings did actually play about half of the snaps last week for Birmingham, actually was on the field more than Amari Rodgers. So he has mixing in, and he's extremely cheap on this slate at just $2,400 for the Birmingham Stallions as a potential flex play. It's kind of a rundown of the receivers. Go back to the quarterback position. Skip Holtz did bench his MVP, Adrian Martinez, in the second half last week against the Panthers. He did a lot of numerous media appearances this week with RJ Young from the Number One Football Show, brought to you by Fox Sports. I believe it was a show called Three Man Front down in Birmingham that's been covering the Birmingham Stallions as well. Skip Holtz began this season willing to play both of these quarterbacks in any game to get the job done. He did reiterate that Adrian Martinez is going to be his starter going into this game for the Birmingham Stallions. Now, we have last week's data point fresh in our minds. We know that Skip Holtz is going to do whatever it takes to win this football game. I am going to project Adrian Martinez for the largest share of quarterback plays because he's starting the game, but understand that there is potentially a short leash here, and Matt Corral could get some work. At low to no ownership, Matt Corral is an interesting tournament play just because if you look at what he did in just roughly 50% of the snaps last week, gave you 13 fantasy points, that could be a 0% owned differentiator in a showdown tournament. He's not starting this game, so if you're playing cash games, I would not be considering Matt Corral at all at this point. But there is absolutely a threat to Martinez's playing time to be aware of from Matt Corral, who actually began the 2024 UFL season as Birmingham's starter here. There's no threat, I don't think, to Chase Garber's workload as he played 100% of the snaps against the St. Louis Battlehawks in the XFL Championship game. So I think we can safely deploy Chase Garbers. Now, at running back, we have seen an uber efficient performance from Anthony McFarland over his last 4 games played for the Brahmas. Got hurt in week 3, had 15 fantasy points, and he has exceeded that total in every game that he has played since then. There is a key distribution of work between Anthony McFarland and John Lovett that I actually talked about in the Occupy Fantasy Discord a little earlier this week. The bottom line with these two players, McFarland's going to be far more active as far as snaps played in the passing game for the Brahmas. He's over-indexed John Lovett on opportunities to receive the football, to run routes, to block in the passing game. Obviously, we see the 11 rushes for 115 yards and a touchdown last week that he flashed, the 15 rushes for 82 yards just 3 weeks ago against the same Stallions team as well. But look at that target volume in week 8 against Arlington, week 9 against Birmingham. That's probably what we should expect for McFarland here. The reverse is true with John Lovett, who's significantly cheaper than McFarland this week. 18 rushes against the Battlehawks last week for 81 yards. Virtually no role in the passing game anymore over his last 2 games played because that is Anthony McFarland's role. So Anthony McFarland is going to be the running back on passing downs, going to have a healthy amount of the work on rushing downs, but it's more like a 65 to 35 split in favor of John Lovett when the Brahmas choose to run the football. And at just $5,800, I think Lovett is an undervalued opportunity with some potential touchdown regression on the table for the Brahmas here because he has not scored in the last couple of weeks that he's played with a healthy amount of touches. So just be aware of that as you're building your lineups this week. I think it's okay to play both of these guys in the same lineup if you choose to do so because they're both going to have a healthy amount of touches this week. The same goes for the running backs on the Birmingham side. There's really not a tremendous difference in how they're being used, one more in the passing game or in the running game. Last week, virtually identical opportunities. I think when push comes to shove, though, this is kind of a gut call. Skip Holtz trusts CJ Marable a little bit more in general in gotta-have-it situations. This is their veteran runner who's been on the team for all of their championship title runs. We saw 8 rushes last week, just 1 target in the passing game. Ricky Person Jr., 5 rushes last week, 2 targets in the passing game, and had the receiving touchdown from Matt Corral late in that game. But it looks like we lean a little bit more towards CJ Marable for raw touches. Admittedly, the volume here, not super exciting for either player. I think both are playable. And you just look at the big picture data. They're both averaging virtually the same amount of opportunities, fantasy points, over the entire UFL season. You get virtually the same price on either one. I don't think I would play both of these guys in the same lineup. I think I would flip a coin here and pick the one that I think is going to outscore the other, because they are going to somewhat cannibalize each other's work, whereas there's a little bit more of an easily discernible difference in role on the San Antonio side. But if I had to pick one, I think CJ Marable is the one that I'm slightly more interested in. And if I go back to my projections for the championship, it does reflect that as well. I think Marable's going to have roughly 11 fantasy points on average in this game. Ricky Person comes in about 8 to 9. So that's kind of where I'm flipping the coin and landing on CJ Marable myself here for the UFL Championship. Now, Brian usually does a really great job with our Showdown videos on this channel during the NFL season. We're looking forward to getting back into the swing of that for the preseason and the regular season in just a few short weeks. Believe it or not, we are almost there. If you look at your typical low-risk build, we talk about locking up all of the scoring. That means playing both quarterbacks, both running backs from teams in football games to get exposure to all the possible touchdown types that you can see in a contest. But as we have split running back rooms in both offenses here in the UFL Championship game, it just does not seem like we actually can build that way. So if you, in an attempt to lock up all the scoring, we can play Martinez at captain, we can get Garbers in here, and now we've got both quarterbacks from both teams. By my projections, the next best ways to kind of play this slate at running back are going to be Lovett, cheap value, and then Marable, who I think has a better chance to outscore Person in this game. We got 48.50 per player remaining. Usually you go with your special teams units to round it out here. Stallions are the favorite side at $4,800. And then with $4,900 left, you know, you can play a kicker, you can play the other defense, you can play some of those cheap receivers that I talked about from the Birmingham side. But I don't think this is a great low-risk slate, frankly, just because of how spread out the opportunities to touch the football are beyond these quarterbacks. And that's before even going back to what I was talking about earlier, and the risk for being benched here at quarterback. So not a very great low-risk slate, I would say. I think you still can apply low-risk principles somewhat here. You potentially could free up some salary dollars by captaining the defense from the favored side or even the underdog side with the San Antonio Brahmas. Brahmas were the best defense in the UFL this season. And now you have $9,500 to play pretty much anyone that you want in that final spot other than Jontre Kirkland. So maybe you do want to massage that a little bit here. But bottom line, not a great low-risk slate in my opinion. I would say stick to the high-risk contests, the fun Showdown Championship Special. You have a couple of lineups if you want some tickets throughout the UFL season. Going back to what I was talking about with the high-level metrics. You want to captain a pass catcher, I think. If you're getting a little different, the next best thing to do is to captain a running back that has a lot of upside that could potentially dominate the scoring. I do think John Lovett at a cheap cost is the most interesting one to do that with. That's it for me here, guys. Thanks for following along all season with the UFL videos. It's been a pleasure to make these videos for you. Good luck in the UFL Championship game, and I will talk to you next when I talk to you.